Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Coast's The Brief, our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Molitzes, and my co-host is Carrie Eleveld, and today we are going to be talking about Texas. We have spent quite a bit of time talking
Did you
about
say
Arizona.
Texas?
Texas. We've been talking a lot about Arizona and about Georgia, and we even have spent maybe an inordinately amount of time on Mississippi. Mississippi's a state that I definitely see as a state that is potentially a purple to blue state, but like in a decade. Like I'm thinking long term, right? So it's time right now to look at a state that is a hopefully a much shorter turnaround time or time to turn blue than Mississippi or South Carolina.
Right. And a state that would absolutely blow up the map. I mean, it would just ruin the Republican map if Democrats could turn Texas.
Yeah, there's no map possible in which Republicans win the presidency if they lose Texas. It's not mathematically impossible. It's pretty much practically impossible. I mean, you're looking at the five big states, right? Number one is California, solidly Democratic. Number two is Texas, which has been a Republican stronghold and has balanced out California to a great extent. Third is Florida, the ultimate battleground state that always seems to fall just on the side of red.
Never trust Florida. Never trust
Florida. But then after that, you're looking at New York and you're looking at Illinois, two really solid Democratic states. And if you go down the list of the top 10, you got states like Georgia, you got states that are already trending in our direction, right? But you're looking at those big five states, and there is a world in which Democrats could actually lock up California and Texas. And really at that point, the presidency is barring some kind of massive scandal or weird sort of dynamics in a normal election. I don't see how Republicans can win a national election without Texas.
Right, assuming we're a democracy.
The biggest.
Seriously, assuming that Republicans don't manage to work a number on us and votes no longer, we have some sort of performative vote the way like Russia does or something,
So if you want to sort of get an idea where Texas is going, in 2012, when Barack Obama was running for re-election against Mitt Romney won that state. Republicans won that state by 16, 17 points. Hillary Clinton, 4 years later, in 2016, as unpopular and divisive as she was, Hillary Clinton lost the state by 9. And that was sort of a bit of a wake-up call, right? Still a pretty, it's pretty safe Republican victory, but that gap had almost split in half, right? It was coming down fast. Joe Biden last year only lost the state by 5.5 points. And there wasn't really much of an investment in the state, right? So this is sort of its natural dynamics without any national investment. Today, we're going to be talking to an organization that's really focused on organizing people. And it's going to be an amazing discussion because what these people are doing is nothing short of phenomenal. So 5.5 points.
Let's remember, too, that Cruz just barely won re-election. Wasn't it by 2 points or something that he ended up beating out Beto O'Rourke? Is that?
Yeah, it was
slimmer than 5.
Points. Yeah, it was 2 points. And from a raw vote total, Beto O'Rourke lost by 200,000 votes, which seems like a big number, but actually it's only 2 points. It's a big state. And the numbers, the demographic numbers in Texas are shifting pretty dramatically every year. About 60 to 80,000 old white people exit the electorate. They die off. And I don't remember the exact same numbers, but about 100,000 Latinos turn 18. Now, that means that there's a big shift in a predominantly Democratic constituency to, and a big loss amongst a predominantly Republican constituency. Now, of course, not every senior white person is a Republican, and 18-year-old Latinos may be the worst performing voters in Texas in the entire country. So it's not as simple as adding and subtracting and boom, it's, we won the state. Obviously, otherwise it would already be a purple or maybe even a blue state. Texas Latinos are historically some of the lowest performing voters in the entire country. And on top of that, we just had this weird dynamic, and I'm hoping to get a little bit of clarity into it today from our guests at the Texas Organizing Project. Latino as a percentage, Donald Trump actually gained a few points. Now, in absolute numbers, actually, Democrats came out ahead, right? Because the turnout was so much bigger that it's on a raw vote total that Democrats actually made gains amongst Latinos. But it is actually concerning to see what happened on a percentage basis, right?
On a percentage basis, yeah. I will say, yeah, go ahead.
No, go.
Well, I'm super interested in trying to figure out what happened, especially in South Texas, because in the Rio Grande Valley area, is because of it's still an open question to me whether Trump just turned out a bunch of new Latino voters, or whether he actually persuaded some Latino voters over from the Democratic side who had voted for Clinton in 2016. So I'm interested. Is it just just upping in turnout, or is there persuasion there too that happened?
Yeah, there's a bunch of theories, and I'm really, really eager to hear from our guests because they've actually done some studies of this vote. So they actually may have some clarity, but there's several theories going around. One of them may be that just like George Bush gained with Latino voters when he ran for re-election, it might just be a simple incumbency thing where you gain a couple of points just by being the incumbent. It could be that. It could be that there's a hidden deplorable community amongst Latinos. I mean, that's very, very possible. There's nothing special about Latinos that says that they can't be total a-holes. And if they voted for Trump, I would argue that they're probably total a-holes. In Texas, there's a big chunk, particularly in those border counties. A lot of those Latinos are working for ICE. They're working for border-focused law enforcement. They are also predominantly likely to work in extraction industries, in oil fields and gas fields. And those industries are obviously very much Republican and may have, messaged their employees or their workers to vote for Donald Trump to protect their livelihood. And that could be a very, real issue. Or maybe it just so happens that there's part of the Donald Trump message and the Republican message that really appealed to a certain segment of the Latino community. And this might be more lasting and it may be a bigger issue, particularly since Democrats have historically and to this day have underinvested in the Latino vote. So there's a lot of potential reasons that this might be the case. And so, like I said, I'm really eager to hear from our guests what they have seen in their numbers.
Yeah, well, I think we can't underestimate either what's happening, and something we need to ask them about with the voter suppression bills, right? Because Texas is in the process of trying to do something like Georgia that they might be trying to make like Georgia light, so it's not quite, they don't want to be the next Georgia. They don't want a major all-star game or something like that to pull out, a major revenue earner for the state to pull out of the state and relocate their event because they've passed a voter suppression law. But we know that the Texas Republicans are trying to do that right now and trying to make it just enough that it pleases their base voters who still, most of whom still believe that the election was stolen from Trump, and they baselessly believe that. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence whatsoever. But they now, because of the big lie, need to feel like they need to appease Trump voters in order to get them to turn out, because they already don't trust the system. But at the same time, don't want to end up on the Georgia side of things. So I know some of those suppression efforts. I'm not familiar with all of the intricacies, but I know some of them specifically are targeted at Black voters in Houston, because obviously Houston has a high Black voter population that's very important to Democrats.
Yeah, we're seeing this. Yeah, we're absolutely. That's a great thing. We definitely need to ask him about those voter suppression, and I bet you they're working very diligently on that issue because of its importance. Republicans have sort of nationally, they've given up trying to convince people based on ideology, right? I mean, they're the party of Mr. Potato Head and Dr. Seuss, and I don't know.
Can I just say something about this that I think is interesting? Because I've been writing a lot about the Republican Party and trying to figure out what the heck is happening there. And then I'll stop and we can get into our guests because I think they're ready to go. But I will just say that the thing that I thought that was probably was the best summation I could find on what's going on with the Republican Party right now came from a writer at the Bulwark named Jonathan V. Last, and I don't follow him regularly, but he said the Republican Party is now a lifestyle brand and not a political party, not something where the base voters, particularly the Trumpers. Now, I think this just, could decimate Republicans with suburban voters personally. But where the base voters, the Trumpers, aren't looking for political outcomes as much as they're just looking for something that, draws blood from Democrats, owns the libs, that kind of thing. Like, they're not really looking for policies. They just want stunts. They just want, vitriol, and that's it. And it's a lifestyle brand. And when I started thinking about Republican Party like that, I was like, it is. That's what it is now. It's a lifestyle brand. It's not a party that's offering any solutions to any problems whatsoever.
I mean, they literally thought that buying Dr. Seuss books was somehow like sticking it to the libs, as if we care if they buy Dr. Seuss books, and as if green eggs and ham was any remotely controversial, right? That wasn't the issue. So, but as long as they're doing that, they weren't organizing against the Recovery Act. They're not organizing against the infrastructure bill. So I'm almost kind of happy that they're doing that bit of whatever, that lifestyle thing that they've got going, because it's by abandoning a policy and ideology basis for their party, it makes it easier for Democrats to govern. Ironically,
exactly.
Does it make it easier to win elections? We're going to find out.
Right.
I think, that's an open question. And I think this is a good time then to bring on our guests for today. They are Michelle Tremillo. She is the Executive Director of Texas Organizing Project, and Brianna Brown. She is the Deputy Director of the Texas Organizing Project. So the Texas Organizing Project was founded in 2009 and organizes Black and Latino communities in Dallas, Harris, and Bexar counties at San Antonio, with the goal of transforming Texas into a state where working people of color have the power and representation they deserve. They have more than 285,000 members and supporters who help lead their direct action organizing, grassroots lobbying, and electoral organizing. And I definitely want to talk about all three of those components because they're all so critically important. So, Brianna and Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here.
So we'll start with the easy question, right? Tell us a little bit about your organization and what the origin story of the Texas Organizing Project.
Sure. So I think the easiest way to describe it, the way that we describe it, our members love to describe it, is that at top we fight with two fists. Our first fist is our people power fist. That is our year-round community organizing on a racial and economic justice agenda. As you mentioned in the intro, our primary focus is on organizing Black and Latino families to come together to build power together to transform our state. The issues that we work on include ending mass incarceration, immigrant rights, education justice, housing justice, access to healthcare, economic justice issues like living wages, paid sick leave. And more recently, we've started to work on climate justice issues as well. Our second fist is our political power fist. That is at election time, we run large-scale voter mobilization programs tied back to that racial and economic justice agenda. We focus on growing the electorate, again, in particular in Black and Latino communities, to build the number of people voting so that ultimately we can transform our state, and it will be transformed by the majority of us that live here. And in 2020, we ran our largest election program ever, even in a pandemic. We reached out to 1.9 million voters of color across the state. Turned out about 900,000 of them, about 450,000 of them had not cast a ballot in 2016, and about 350,000 of those had not cast a ballot in either 2016 or 2018. So again, for us, it's always about growing our representation and growing the number of us participating in our democracy.
So, Michelle, and I'm going to ask this of both of you guys. Michelle, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to into activism generally, and at the Texas Organizing Project.
So I'm going to let Brianna go first this time.
Okay, Brianna.
I knew she was going to do that. The way that I describe like my entry is really because I grew up in a really Afrocentric household, and it was a couple different threads, right? So my mom kind of was bougie Black, right? Her mom was a vice president of a HBCU in Austin, and my dad's family were sharecroppers from Crittenden County, Arkansas. And so our household, there was never a time that I did not understand that I am Black and that Blackness had a political identity. All my dolls were Black. Our greeting cards, my mom would color them in, right, before there was like mahogany. We had every Black magazine come into the house: Essence, Ebony, Jet, Merge, everything. And one of my most vivid memories when I was growing up was when Jesse Jackson was running for president in 1988. I got to skip school. We went to the rally. We went to IHOP before. I had a little piece of sausage in my pocket. And I still remember what it felt like to be in that room with mostly Black folks, wrapped in, Jesse's every word. And that feeling has never left. So I've always known that I'm going to be in the game off the
You had no choice.
I really did. I had no choice whatsoever. And then, it's amazing to be able to do this work at home. Both me and Michelle are fourth generation Texans. I take this work very personally. Texas is as much mine as it is Abbott's or Patrick's or any of his cronies, right? So yeah, this work is in my DNA, and feel really honored and privileged to be able to do it, as a vocation.
That's pretty awesome. Michelle, is your story that exciting?
Oh, none of the stories I tell are as exciting as the ones Brianna tells.
Oh, I was excited by your intro. I thought it was great.
Thank you. Well, as Brianna mentioned, I'm fourth generation Tejana. My great grandmother immigrated from Matamoros, Mexico, which is just on the other side of the bridge from Brownsville, Texas. That's where my mother was born. My grandfather was in the military, so at some point they moved to San Antonio, which is Military City, USA. They moved to San Antonio, and that's where I was born. So fourth generation Tejana. I would say I did not grow up in a household that talked about politics. It was, my mother, her first language was Spanish. She had an 8th grade education. I can remember living in 8 different places by the time I was 8 years old. Like we had a lot of economic instability growing up, and finally settled in HUD housing, HUD subsidized housing, when I was 8. And, I was this really good student. I got a scholarship to go to Stanford. And, when I got to Stanford, I realized 2 things. One, I had always understood that I was poor. What I had not understood was that everyone else in my neighborhood was also poor, right? Everybody in my school was also like, until I saw wealth, I didn't understand.
Wow.
I hadn't begun to understand poverty. So that's like one thing that I learned at Stanford. The other thing was there were not a whole lot of kids with a background like mine that I came across, and that I was an exception to a rule. And I think that is what planted the seed for me to eventually, I have like a meandering sort of initial few years post-college, but, and I actually also have a Jesse Jackson story, because I
Did
went
you
to
have
college.
a piece of sausage in your pocket?
No.
Because I love that detail. I was like, yeah, bring the sausage. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I was walking from class one day, and he was giving there was a rally in the big white plaza, it's called, and I was walking, and so I stopped because it's Jesse Jackson, and he was talking about how important it was to register to vote, and where I was going to sleep tonight was where I should be registered to vote, and I wasn't registered, so because of Jesse Jackson, I registered to vote. That very day, I went to the table and registered. But, eventually I answered an ad in the paper that was as simple as want to work for social justice. And I said, yes, I do. Yeah. And that is how my community organizing career began 19 years ago.
Can I start out with a general question, given what your organization does? It sounded like you made nearly 1 million contacts with voters of color in Texas. Did I get that? Did I hear that right? It was like 900,000, I think. Is that, Brana, let me go ahead and ask you, did you find that in contacting voters of color that they had, what were the people who hadn't voted before? Because you guys have turned out a lot of them, a 450,000 increase, I think you said, from 2016 to 2020. What were their barriers to voting? And were they the same among demographics, or were they similar?
Well, I think that there's a story that unites voters, here in Texas. One was alluded to in Marcos's introduction around voter suppression. So that's one that I want to make sure that we, spend some time, because there are some real structural barriers that exist and have existed in Texas for a really long time. Like the most recent kind of egregious attacks on our voting rights are just the most recent. The bedrock for those are voter ID laws, massive voter purges that have already happened, insidious misinformation campaigns that keep ex-offenders who should be able to vote from voting. So that there's already this kind of like bedrock. So those structural mechanisms, similar to Jim and Jane Crow era of grandfather clauses, literacy tests, poll taxes, keep people successfully out of the process. So that's 100% true. And, we're on the ground now trying to figure out how to make, there's still time in the clock in Texas to not do what Georgia did, or, Governor Kemp did behind closed doors and sign really repressive voter suppression laws. So we're doing hand-to-hand combat right now. There's still time on the clock for a lot of people to throw down on that organizing effort. I think the other part of this story is that people are not courting us. What is amazing whenever I look at the example of the other side, they go to the ends of less than 2 months shy of a presidential election. They decided to push through a Supreme Court nominee solely based on, in large part because of the commitment they have around pro-life, whatever that is, right? Pro-life. They deliver. COVID. And yes, they go to the ends of the earth. But, we don't always see that on our side, like people really delivering. So much of the work that we do is inspiring folks to the ballot box and making sure we're there the day after, which is when our real jobs begin, right? To hold that institution, that elected accountable and deliver. One of the big wins that we had in Harris County, population, where Houston is, population 4.5 million, is around misdemeanor bail reform.
County.
Yeah.
Battleground state. What, 25 states? Yeah.
Was around misdemeanor bail reform. So no longer do you have to sit on a misdemeanor charge locked up because you can't afford to purchase your freedom on a misdemeanor charge. We're able to talk with people about that all the time. And people know, people are like, oh yeah, my cousin, my friend, didn't have to sit up in Harris County jail because, oh yeah, misdemeanor bail reform. So we are figuring out ways to,
Right. That was the district attorney's race where progressives got behind Kim Ogg, correct? Is that how you pronounce her last name?
That's how you pronounce her last name. You're rewinding the clock. That was back in 2016.
That was 2016.
Misdemeanor bail reform, PS, didn't happen until 3 years later. So there's a little asterisk there.
Right. So, but it was that activism after winning that DA race, 100%. Correct? Because without that DA, it doesn't happen, or maybe it happens. I don't know. But how important was that electoral race to this reform effort?
The biggest races that were important to that were the Harris County Commissioner's Court, which is like our executive branch in every county. We were able to successfully flip the Harris County Commissioner's Court. So we have 3 votes there, 3 out of 5, and we can move a progressive agenda. And it was really having that trifecta on that court that allowed for misdemeanor bail reform to be a real thing. And that, the example of the work that we've done in Harris County is really a case study for how we want to scale across the state. right? Carrie, you mentioned, or I forget in the intro, just Harris County is a county of color. Lots of Black folks live there, Latinos, folks in the AAPI community, and every election cycle we are expanding that electorate, and we are winning countywide. We are winning city local races, and those have a meaningful impact statewide.
I mean, you're getting people to vote for a county level race, which is it's a magnitude of order more difficult, presumably, than a presidential race, right? This is so hyper local, and then you're giving them victories. You're talking about the victories. I assume, does that build on itself? Does it make it easier the next time you have to get people excited to vote for county level offices?
Yeah,
they're not sexy, right? It's not sexy races.
No, they're not sexy. However, at this moment in time in Texas, I mean, we do live in apartheid-like conditions in Texas, and considering we just changed presidents, but for the last 4 years we lived under a terrible president. So the only place where we can impact change in Texas is actually at the local level, and so. And the thing about engaging with unlikely voters is that part of why they don't engage is because it doesn't make a difference, right? Like actually part of the equation, if you want full participation from our communities, is that if I vote, it has to make a difference, right? So that change in policy that happens after I vote reinforces that I should go vote again, right? So it's this cycle of participation that is critical to people becoming habitual voters. And so, to be honest, in 2016, since you brought that up, while perhaps those of us who live politics in a different way, we're all watching Trump and Hillary, what we were talking to people on the doors in September about was further down the ballot. Like we were talking about misdemeanor bail reform. We were talking about cite and release. We were talking about if we elect this sheriff, he will pull out of the 287G ICE agreement, right? Like we were talking about real tangible things.
And that's using city police to round up undocumented immigrants?
Yeah, and the county level. So this was a county level office. This was the sheriff. Yes. Right. So, we engage in our municipal elections. I think a lot of people around the country feel like this is an off year. We're in municipal elections in Dallas and San Antonio right now, May 1st, and our people are working hard to elect progressive champions at the local level who will continue to push the bounds of, increasingly at the state level, they're trying to preempt everything that we do, right? Like we did pass paid sick leave policies in Austin, San Antonio, and Dallas. Like that happened. The first, second, and third cities in the South to pass paid sick leave were all in Texas, right? Like that is like the real work that we're doing on the ground. Now they're not in effect, of course. It's still Texas, right? We're tied up in court. We're getting preempted at the state, all of that, right? Like it's still, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that we are constantly pushing what we expect of our government, and we are constantly demonstrating that when we participate in our numbers, we can change things.
What I hear you guys saying is that actually the local races are sexy. As long as when it, when the change happens, then there's something to reinforce that change. And Brianna, I noticed you giving a thumbs up, and I could see you wanted to talk. I do have to ask, since we did just change, presidents, do you think the Biden administration is delivering for the voters that you talk to, that you help turn out? Brianna, I wonder what your take is on that.
I think that Biden will have the most progressive presidency. When it's all said and done, the Biden-Harris administration will be the most progressive that we've ever seen in U.S. history. And that's saying a lot. Yeah, I know. It's weird. Yeah.
Still can't believe it.
So, that's saying a lot. I think that, one of the things I was inspired by, I know he had an advisory committee shortly after he was he was officially the nominee to figure out like how to bring in more voices to the table, right? And a lot of folks from the movement were a part of that advisory committee. So I think that some of the things, certainly the immediate relief checks that folks have been able to get and understand more is coming has been really helpful. I mean, locally, we've been pushing for direct cash assistance for people, post Abbott outage, aka Winter Storm Uri. So we see that at the federal level happening. I've been really encouraged by the big infrastructure bill that's been proposed. What it contains around commitments around a Green New Deal. No matter that there are ways that really showing up for our communities and going beyond kind of like the lip service. So I think right now, I think he's doing the vaccine rollout. There are people are getting vaccines. No matter Johnson & Johnson, what happened today, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of like tangible things we can point to. We're, as an organization, very interested in the Breathe Act, which is known as the modern day civil rights legislation. That really isn't just about like criminal legal reform, but then also what does the aspiration look like for our educational system, for our healthcare. So I think I'm hopeful, and what I know as an organizer is that we got to keep organizing, right? We got to keep the pressure on. We got to make sure he understands there's going to be real accountability, and keep people inspired to stay in the game, right?
I mean, that's the game, right? Because 2022 will be a bloodbath if our people stay home. I mean, it's going to be a base turnout election. Every election now is a base turnout election at this point, in midterms especially. So, you talked about earlier, just a short while ago, about passing great legislation at the city level, at the county level, yet you're preempted by a hostile state level government, right? So that's really the next question. How close are we to flipping Texas blue? You have statewide elections next year. And
no pressure, but are we talking 1 year or two? What are we talking here? No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I'm a jokester, so forget about me. But yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead, Marcos.
Yeah. So Michelle, I guess I'll throw this to you, unless you want to kick it over to Brianna. But how close are we? What are the impediments? Because you have Beto O'Rourke coming within 2 points in the last midterm election. Last year in a presidential election, Joe Biden came within 5.5 points. I mean, the gap is narrowing over, if you look at the trends, but we still have a gap. So what's it going to take to close it? Because I see two scenarios. One is there's a trend and we keep getting closer and closer. And at some point, there's an inflection point and boom, like Texas is a blue state. Or we get trapped into like North Carolina, Florida sort of scenario where it's close, but Republicans keep squeezing out those victories, 2, 3, 4 point victories. So where are we headed? Is Texas on the path towards turning blue?
Well, so at top, our signature color is teal. And at top, we say we're on the path to turn Texas teal. And in particular, that's a nod to the communities of color that are going to actually lead us into transforming our state, right? The path forward to Texas no longer being controlled by Republicans is rooted in growing the electorate, and it is growing the electorate in communities of color, in particular, Latino and in the Black community. Although the AAPI community, outperformed everybody in Texas in 2020, right? So I certainly want to acknowledge that and say thank you.
Celebrate it, yeah.
Celebrate it. But it is, your question of does it happen in 2022 or does it happen in 2024? It is one that we are still researching. I think, we're an organization. Back in 2011, we did a big landscape analysis. Our electoral strategy director, Crystal Cermenio, asked a simple question: who's not voting in Texas, right? And where do they live? And, at the end of this research project, was able to see, here we were back in 2011, a 27 million state of population, 254 counties, like it's just too big. Everybody says Texas is just too big. There's no real path. Well, at the end of this, we had a plan. There were 9 counties in Texas, the 9 most populated counties, where the majority of people of color live. We had about 2.2 million people of color already registered but not voting, and then another few million eligible but unregistered in just 9 counties in Texas. And so if we can steadily chip away, at this point we were losing statewide elections by about 1 million voters. So like 1 million votes. And so, just it takes hard work. Anybody in Georgia, anybody in Arizona will tell you this was a 10-year plan. They will tell you that cycle after cycle, they kept building their electorate. This is what we're doing in Texas. Is it a 10-year plan? Because we've been doing this. Is it a 10-year plan or is it a 12-year plan? Invite us back in 6 months. We'll have an answer for you. And, or maybe even 3 months, but, the data is going to inform us. Like we're a very heavily data informed organization. And then we go out and we build the relationships that we need. Right. And it's all about scale in Texas. We talked about Harris County being larger than 26 states. I believe one of those states is Georgia, right? Like it's scale.
Yeah.
So we're getting closer. Like you said, we're chipping away. When people were disappointed that Beto O'Rourke lost, we were ecstatic because we knew he had an 800,000 vote gap, like no intervention whatsoever, 800,000 vote gap, like generic, candidate, right? So to close the gap by that much was huge, right? So, can we close it in 2020? Is a combination also of investment, right? Like there is, I think across the country and certainly in Texas, this myth that the swing white voter is going to save us. And so much effort and money and attention gets put on the swing white voter. And we do the best that we can with what's left over, right? And I think if we had a more proportional distribution in those strategies of the funding, then we would see our electorate grow faster.
This is a good opportunity to let you guys plug where people can donate right now, because what we know from everyone we've talked to is that the early money makes the difference, right? The more early money you guys get, the more you can invest and know what you have to work with in terms of hiring, staffing up, building infrastructure. So please tell us where to go so people can give early money right now.
OrganizeTexas.org, and make sure on the donate link you click Top PAC. Make sure that's the one you click.
Yeah, I also, every time we talk about donating to organizations, I really recommend people do recurring donations. And because having that steady stream is incredibly helpful as far as planning and budgeting and things like that. So I highly recommend, if you can and you're able to, make that a recurring donation and be part of sort of this ground level turning Texas blue teal effort. So one of the sort of stories that came out of Texas, unexpected stories in 2020, was that Donald Trump, as odious as a human piece of crap that he is, actually gained Latino support in terms of percentages. Do you guys have any idea what happened and whether that is something that we need to be worried about moving forward, or maybe it was an anomaly, really just focus on Donald Trump? Who wants to, is that you, Michelle, or Brianna?
I think that's probably me. Although, I get sad answering this question. I think there's a lot of theories out there. They all have merit as to why Latinos would vote for Trump over Biden. And I think sometimes they're not coming at the question from the right angle, right? Like I think that there's a couple of things, right? One, only 55% of Latinos cast a ballot in the biggest election of our lifetimes. only 55% of Latinos cast a ballot, right? And so, the majority of Latinos are not participating and are not seeing that change can happen in their lives if they participate. So, that's one thing. And two, investment in a relationship with Latinos has not really happened, right? Like there's a lot of talk about South Texas in particular with Latinos, although we did see it in some of the big cities as well. There's an organization called the Libra Initiative. It's Koch brother funded. They have been investing in South Texas for over a decade. They do things like offer citizenship classes. They offer GED classes. They build community with the very voters that they want to court, right? They build a reciprocal relationship, right? We did this. It was a nonpartisan study. We talked to a little over 100 Latinos across the state in 5 major metro areas. Some of them regular voters, some of them non-voters, Republican leaning, Democratic leaning. We wanted to understand their relationship to government. And over, we found that, we did this great report with, we partnered with Culture Concepts, and Dr. Cecilia Bailly and her team coined this. They called our political values hybridity, right? That there's actually a hybridity, right? That there are some that are conservative leaning, there are some that are progressive leaning, and that we hold both in a lot of cases. In these interviews, this came through, and that many Latinos don't strongly affiliate with a party. They consider themselves independent, even if they almost always voted for one party over the other, right? But they were attracted to the candidates. And, what we found was that, people who are participating, they believe they have a right to demand something of their government, and they have a right to be heard. If we don't participate, we don't feel like we have a right to be heard, right? There's a lack of a sense of belonging in participating in our government. We also found that most of the non-voters tended not to live with somebody who voted, right? That we have to remind ourselves that voting is a social habit, right? And it is done through practice and modeling of the behavior of others, right? So voting is a social habit, right? And so you have generations, in particular in South Texas and in San Antonio, where I'm from. I'm 4th generation, right? My mother didn't vote in local elections.
You weren't even registered to vote until college, right?
She did not. That was not one of the first things she made sure I did, right? But many people in this country, that's one of the first things they do when they turn 18, right? So, but not so, right? We found in these interviews that we did. So, there's a lot of work to be done, and it doesn't start 30 days before the election,
right?
8 weeks before the election, right? It is a year round. And again, we have to come back to this, we've been talking about it repeatedly. If I show up and vote, it has to mean something, right? I voted for you. Now, what are you going to do, right? And that relationship works both ways, right? So that elected official needs to make sure that when they get into office, they are trying to change things, right? They are pushing forth policies that are going to have a positive impact, that you are engaging that relationship. Politicians maintain relationships with the constituencies that they think are important, right? They make sure that they're in communication regularly with the chambers. They make sure that whoever they deem important to them, they are in relationship with every day of the year. They're just not doing it with Latino voters.
Right.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, which is a lot of people look at, for instance, South Texas in particular, and they're assigning whether or not, people were responding to Trump's message or Biden's message or whatever. Do you think it really was less a matter of the candidate's message and more just a matter of this consistent investment from, as you noted, the Libra Initiative, or Democrats literally like dropping the ball and not investing. I mean, do you think this was more about a relationship over time or a presidential candidate's message?
So we don't organize in South Texas, so I want to be careful not to pretend to know more than I do down there. My best educate is that it's something of both, right? I mean, I will tell you what we saw. This was our first election without straight ticket voting, and so we did see people in South Texas, and we saw this in Latino majority precincts, even in Harris County, right? Like this is. So it's not just limited to South Texas, but we saw Latino voters vote for Trump and then go back to voting for Democrats down the ballot. Right? Like there was a choice made, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the most important takeaways are one, more than anything, we should be persuading Latinos to vote, and yes, we can persuade them to vote for Democrats. They are voting for Democrats, even as they vote for Trump.
I remember about 10 years ago that talking about Georgia and saying there's 700,000 unregistered African Americans in Metro Atlanta alone, and if we were to register these people, Georgia would be a purple state. People would snicker and laugh. But over the 10 years, this happened, and a lot of it was obviously Stacey Abrams and her ability to get the resources to focus on that community that historically hasn't been there. Added in the runoff, we saw that Black vote actually went up in a lot of those rural counties because there's like, oh my God, my vote matters, right? That idea that the vote matters, it's incredibly powerful, particularly in states where liberals haven't had much of a voice statewide. So I don't think people may realize that because as a percentage, the Texas Black vote is not as big as the Latino vote. So it kind of gets overshadowed. But I think it's the largest by raw numbers, right? In the entire country, the Texas Black community. I think it is, right?
Well, so we're second behind New York State as far as just demographics, right? So we have 3.7 million Black folks that call Texas home, and that's just the census. We're second behind Georgia with the amount of registered Black voters, but because we have so many folks that live here, it's more than more than the registered Black voters in Georgia. And we have another 700,000 Black voters that are eligible but not registered to vote. So that
God, it's just like
I know.
Georgia.
When you were, yes, we need to do a lot of voter registration, and we need to expand the number of, in particular, Black folks that are going to vote in Texas. This year in Texas, 2 days shy of early vote being over, Black folks had exceeded their 2016 turnout. Like we went and vote, like we went to the polls this year. And that was especially true, here in Texas. So when we're talking about the work that we do, it very much is about the linked fates of Black folks and Latinos, across Texas. And that it both when we come to the organizing fist and how we invest our dollars in talking with Black folks during, an election cycle. And so, a point that Michelle was alluding to, not just talking to folks a couple months before or in some instances, because that money comes in very late, it could be 2 weeks out. That it really is about maintaining, consistent communication with folks to be, trusted messengers.
And you got just to make it clear to listeners, 700,000 Black folks being unregistered. Trump won the state by, I think, around 630,000 votes or something like that. So, theoretically, if you register all those folks, you're in a very competitive, if not a winning position, just to put a point on it.
And one thing we learned in Georgia is that small communities matter, right? When you win a state by 10,000, 11,000 votes, the Desi community, the South Asian Indian community, it's small. It mattered. The Asian community mattered. All these sort of little communities mattered. So we're running out of times, and I know we're actually holding you past the time I said, so I really appreciate this. Carrie talked earlier about voter suppression, and so you talked about how you guys are organizing to stop it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because this is sort of an existential, fight, right? Our ability, you're already having to get people who don't have a preponderance of voting. Is that the right word? They're not more likely voters. And then Republicans, they know this. So they're trying to put these little roadblocks in there to keep it that way. So what are you guys doing specifically to try to fight that?
Right, but some of it is a backlash against, I believe y'all said this in the opening, what happened in Harris County, right? In Harris County, remember that's the county where Houston is. We flipped that county, a couple years ago, and there were real innovations with voting, right? Their budget went from $4 million in elections to $30 million. That kind of investment led to things like 24-hour voting centers and drive-through voting, right? In the time of a pandemic, that kind of made sense, and it really did increase and expand the electorate there. So some of the efforts, especially what's contained in the voter suppression laws now, are directly trying to thwart those kind of innovations that are happening in our counties that expanded the electorate of color. Right? They're not talking about Loving County population 98. They're talking about Harris County population 4.5 million. Right? So one of the things, we've been doing what organizers do. We've been taking it to the streets. We have been, the last couple of weeks, outside of AT&T headquarters here in Dallas. AT&T, following the uprisings, made commitments. If you go on the website now, you see they talk about being in alignment with Black Lives Matter. Post-insurrection, they made commitments not to give to folks who were objectors to the 2020 election. Records show, I encourage folks to look at Judd Legume's research that AT&T has given over $500,000 to the likes of Dan Patrick, our lieutenant governor, Abbott, our governor, Senator Angela Paxson, who's a co-sponsor of one of these voter suppression bills. So, it's just lip service right now. They actually have an opportunity to make good on an espoused commitment around Black equity. In fact, if you go to AT&T headquarters today, you walk into the lobby, there's a Dream in Black exhibition. It really is not even just ironic, it's hypocritical.
No,
right? And then meanwhile, they are investing real money into these political campaigns of folks that are championing these bills. So we're keeping the pressure on. Texas is also home to lots of Fortune 500 companies. We could call the roll: Southwest, Pepsi, Valero, Whole Foods.
Awesome.
Google has a big presence here. Facebook has a big presence here. And no one has come out. And what we're demanding is two things. One, full opposition to these voter suppression bills, not milquetoast statements that mean nothing, that say nothing, but real unequivocal statements about being in opposition. And then two, stop giving money to these candidates, right?
Yep. So Michelle and Brianna, we're out of time, but Michelle gave a pitch for Texas Organizing Project. Brianna, why don't you close out with another pitch for Texas Organizing Project to drive it home, drive the pitch home.
Delivering Texas to the progressive column is a big experiment. It's going to take a lot of investment. And we can't be scared of that at all. We need big ideas. And the big idea that we're proposing is that y'all help us build a Texas for all, a Texas that works, a Texas where there's maximum participation at the ballot box, not a Texas for the few. So you go to www.organizetexas.org. You click on that good donate button, make sure it's to the PAC so we can spend those political dollars. You can be a part of this amazing vision to transform Texas and make it a democracy that looks like me and Michelle and has our values.
Brianna, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. I actually wanted to talk to you about who we're going to look to, who we should, the rising stars of Texas politics. We're out of time, but that gives me an excuse to invite you guys again, hopefully soon, to look at more of the personalities that we should be getting behind. So thank you so much for all your work. It's incredibly inspiring, and so much respect for everything you've accomplished, and so much hope for all the work that you're looking at in the future. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Yes.
Carrie, I love talking to organizers.
I know the organizers are great. There's never a shortage of material. It's always like we could ask more. There were like a million more things that I know you wanted to ask and that I wanted to ask too, and we were just happy to have them. But there's never a shortage.
Never a shortage, and I think it's really important. I think this is maybe obvious. Maybe I'm being Captain Obvious here, but if Texas becomes a blue state, even if Republicans have to spend money defending Texas, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to win any presidential election. If you start making inroads in the state legislature, which is actually competitive, the state legislature and the governor and lieutenant governor's office, and in a weird twist, the lieutenant governor has more power in Texas than the governor, then you have a state that not only the people benefit from just having a local government that actually is responsive and is looking towards their interests, but also you really make it difficult for Republicans to do the kind of damage that they're doing at the federal level. So it's really important for people across the country to look at Texas and say, yeah, we want not only those electoral votes, we want those 2 Senate seats. We know how skewed the Senate is against liberals and Democrats, and we're not going to be flipping South Dakota and Wyoming anytime soon. Texas, though, that's 2 seats we can grab.
And Texas is partly a particularly, we forget this. I shouldn't say we forget this, but it's not top of mind for a lot of us who don't live there, that they just had this major disaster there with with the power outage, and it just, the grid going down for like a full week practically, people not having power, then having a follow-up situation with the water and whatever. And, it seems like a situation where the Republicans control the government there. It's competitive, but they still control state government. And, you have to look at that and wonder if people who have, sort of traditionally voted Republican are going to start thinking, I don't think these guys know how to govern. Hi. Oh, hi.
Awesome.
Sorry. Hi.
Don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. That's awesome.
I'm actually not going to put her on camera. But anyway, that's oh yeah, okay. My wife just scooped her up. That's our really, really beautiful daughter. But anyway, hi. She opens the door.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
no, this was Republican ideology in action, right? You had a state that cut off its grid from the rest of the country, so there was no sort of redundancy, no ability of New Mexico to come in or Arkansas Power to come in and help out, and they did that to avoid federal regulation, because once you have interstate, you have federal regulation, and then they basically left it for the market. So people were getting $1,000 bills for power. And then Abbott and everybody tried to blame it on, the regulator windmills there, and windmills.
It's ridiculous. They, it's like the Yosemite Sam, like it wasn't me, but it was that person and that person.
Yeah.
And anyone who's paying attention knows that was an absolute dereliction of duty. Right. If you're a diehard Republican who just isn't willing to look at the facts, then that's one thing. But anyone who really wants their power on, they know that that was a result of a decades long, Republican experiment in non-government,
in free market, let them do whatever they want. So you have that. You have the suburbs, which are, college educated white suburbanites are trending in the Democrats' direction. You have this massive pool of untapped voters of color that we just talked about. It's funny, 700,000 unregistered Black voters in Texas. It's the exact same number that we were talking about in Georgia 10 years ago. There is the opportunity and hopefully the possibility of this flipping really quickly. Georgia and Arizona, it was, we're talking about 33% increase in Arizona in Democratic performance. And it was like 31% in Georgia. 600,000 new voters in Georgia between 2016 and 2020. The numbers are there. It requires an investment. This is what the party doesn't get. donors, the big dollar donor billionaire, our liberal big dollar donors are not getting this. You need to invest in those communities and in organizations like the Texas Organizing Project.
Let me just add real quick that 2022, I don't think anyone understands what the GOP base is anymore. And so any investment that you can make as a Democrat right now in a flippable state could probably go a lot further, because we're going to be coming off at least some legislative wins. And the Republicans are chasing their tails right now, trying to figure out how to get, Trumpers motivated to get to the polls in the midterms, and at the same time alienating a lot of their suburban base, and not just their suburban white voters, their suburban base, which is very mixed across the board. So, this is a good time to be interested, to be curious, and to be investing in what could be a really, really good decade for Democrats if we put the effort in.
Amen. Carrie, that's our show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to our guests, Michelle and Brianna. That was an amazing conversation. Thanks to the Texas Organizing Project for being so cool. Please invest in their efforts. Thanks to Walter Einenkel for producing the show. And thank you, the listener, for joining us this and every week as we talk about these critically important political themes. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating wherever you are watching this or wherever you get your podcasts. You can always talk to us at dailycoast.com or on Twitter at dailycoast. See you next week.